open nationwide, the general election campaign, and three men who know all about that. Lord Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown, is in Yeovil, big supporter of Nick Clegg's, leading the Lib Dem fight in the West Country. Here in the studio, Michael Howard, former Tory leader, cabinet minister, whose protégé David Cameron has moved on to higher things, and Neil Kinnock, Lord Kinnock, former Labour leader who singled out the young Gordon Brown for a top job some years ago. As we plunge into full-scale pell-mell campaigning, how are their boys getting on, and what are the pitfalls ahead? Lord Ashdown, can I start with yourself? Perhaps the sort of dynamics of the three leaders up against each other in these TV campaigns have affected the rest of the newspapers and given Nick Clegg more of a media profile perhaps than you had in your day. But isn't the danger for you now that it becomes the absolute traditional either-or binary kind of campaign?
By the way, this slot seems like a continuation of the ghosts again, if you ask me. The answer to your question is it could. It could. But I don't think that's the danger. I mean, I think you're right, Andrew, in saying that the leaders' debate is the significant different thing about this election. It's already beginning to dominate the press, and I think there'll be great national attention on it. And it's a sort of high noon moment because I think a great number of people will watch and a great number of people will make up their mind. And it will, I think, have an influence on the election which is greater than anything we've ever seen before. I mean, I would have killed for this opportunity. And by the way, I'm supposed to be the only member of the House of Commons who was actually trained to do exactly that. But I think that I think Nick will do well. He has, I think, a capacity to be able to speak in the language of ordinary people. I think people think they know what Gordon Brown is, and I think they've decided they don't want him to continue to be Prime Minister. I think they've seen Mr. Cameron and regard the Tory leader as somebody whose offerings, frankly, are pretty thin. They don't know what he stands for. And I think Nick, as a basic principled politician who believes in a strong set of values, will come across very well.
But he's also the leader who can't stand up and say, when I'm Prime Minister, comma. And that is always going to be a problem. It was a problem for you, and it's been a problem for Liberal Democrat and Liberal leaders before that in the past.
Yes, Andrew, but if you'll forgive me, I don't think it's up to you or a television programme to decide what the British public are going to vote for. I mean, I've heard many interviews saying, well, of course, you're not going to be the Prime Minister. How do you know? I mean, I think it's rather silly of us, if I may say, even perhaps a little bit arrogant of us, to pretend that from a newsroom you can decide the sovereign judgment of the British people in a general election in 4 weeks' time. Leave the decision to them, and they will decide who it is they want to have. I don't think it's up to you or anybody else to start predicting the outcome of an election. That's their choice, not yours.
I would say it's an arrogant, educated guess in that case. But let's...
Well, forgive me, the educated guess. We should... I mean, let me ask you this very direct question, Andrew. Should we be indulging in educated guesses? Or should you on the BBC be telling people what we stand for and leaving the decision to the judgment of the ballot box? Surely that's the right thing to do.
Sure,
why do you spend so much time looking into the crystal ball when you could be telling people what we actually stand for and letting them make up their own mind?
Well, we're looking at the polls rather than the crystal ball, but we will hold that thought and come back to you again in a moment. Turning to my guests in the studio, Michael Howard and Lord Kinnock, a general feeling, in fact, I think Alistair Darling actually said it, that the Conservatives had a good first week, Lord Kinnock.
It's not bad, mainly coming off the back of the quite extraordinary promise to reduce the level of rise in national insurance, and to have that and the reduction in the deficit funded out of efficiency savings, so-called, that have yet to be made and yet to be specified, and many of which, so far as we can understand them, would actually generate cost in the short term rather than save. Now, there's been a spectacular degree of attention to that, and in the first week, I think that that's given the Conservatives a certain comfort. I think that'll be dismantled over the 3 weeks to come as the questions get more pressing.
Because the other thing, I suppose, Michael Howard, is that despite all, I was just being spanked by Paddy Ashdown for talking about the polls, but, you know, if you've had a better first week, it hasn't really been reflected in a change in the polls. Everything seems remarkably stable and unmoving at the moment.
Well, these things take time, don't they, to be reflected in the polls. I think it was a very good week for the Conservatives, and I can't actually remember an election in which the opposition has so seized the initiative by putting forward a plan supported by the government's own advisers, who are saying that these savings can be found, whereas the government seems to be saying, or the Labour Party seems to be saying, we know we're wasting the money, but we're not going to do anything about it for another year.
I think, you see, sitting, as it were, in the lounge with the television turned on or reading the newspapers, for a lot of people it's just been very sterile. We're going to make this percentage of cuts, and no, you're not, yes, we are, and you can't really do it, and so on. I think people watching find it very, very hard to get a grip on this campaign.
I think there's something in that. I think it's also the case, and I'm sure Michael will agree, that elections as processes are rather more sterile than they used to be, because they involve less contact with the public, mainly for security reasons, and less direct confrontation, which is why the leaders' debate is going to provide some refreshment from that, though that is likely to be quite hygienic as well. Now, there's difficulty coming from that, in that elections then are not igniting the public's imagination and interest. However, since the economy is absolutely the dominant issue of this election, and since people need to know what's going to happen to them, their families, their jobs, it is attention to those details, sterile or not, that's going to determine the outcome of the election, which is why I think Gordon's going to win.
Michael Howard.
Well, I agree with an awful lot of what Neil has said, though not his conclusion. And the debates are getting